Hello. Hey, today I'm going to be beginning something new for RUF. I am, over the next several weeks, going to try to interview one person a week to talk about a variety of different things. Today I'm bringing in one of our really good friends, Jessie, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And she is going to talk with us and talk with me about kind of the emotions that we are all experiencing today. And I want to put two disclaimers out there on the front end. One, that this conversation is not a replacement to any sort of therapy that you might be encouraged to go and find. And second, that this is a conversation just about more generalized emotions and anxiety in particular that some of us might be feeling. This is not speaking to those who have any sort of diagnosable anxiety disorders or more of those with chronic issues that they probably need to find professional help with. But that being said, Jessie, I'm glad to be able to chat with you today. Thanks for taking some time to be with us. I wanted to just say on the front end and maybe ask a question that could tee us off. In my conversations with students over the past few weeks, I feel like what I have been hearing from them is one of two things. One is a lot of uncertainty or anxiousness or fear of what's next. Will things ever get back to a supposed normal? The other is just a lot of anger and particularly with our seniors of like, man, all of this just got totally stripped away from me. And so there's lots of, I don't know what to do with what's happened. I'd love to kind of hear what do you see going on today and how would you speak into it in this moment?
Yeah, great question. One thing that's important to know is that all experiences are going to produce a variety and a spectrum and stages of certain emotional responses. One thing I want to reference is, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of this, the stages of grief, right? And you've got the little acronym DABDA, we've got denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Those aren't linear, by the way, so you're not going to always experience those in a straight line, but I think it's important to reference that for this conversation so that people understand there's not going to be a normal or right way to respond to this, because what we're really in and experiencing is, I'd like to go ahead and think of it instead of now as the umbrella of grief. We've lost things, right? There's not only the, I can't see my friends, I can't go out, there's the future idea of things that we've lost. And so I think it's important to be thinking of these emotional experiences, whether anger, anxiety, under this umbrella of grief, that things are changing. But specifically, okay, with anxiety, I think that's going to be an important one for us to talk about. Anxiety is a very helpful natural response in crisis. Okay, college students, you guys regularly have exams. It's natural and helpful to get a little anxious before an exam because it motivates you to do what you need to do. So naturally, instinctively, there's a healthy amount of that. So what happens in the beginning of a crisis is you've got this huge surge of adrenaline. You've got this release of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And that's the kind of fight or flight gets you going. It keeps you moving, keeps you proactive. We've been in this crisis, but the crisis continues. And so what do we do now that our anxiety, that at first is very natural, very geared towards helping us through a crisis, we can't just stay there, but yet we are because we're still afraid.
You're saying that anxiety is something that we need. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but right now it's interesting how you're saying that in this expanded version of crisis that we're all experiencing, like what do we do with that? Or we're going to get, it sounds like you're almost hinting at it's going to wear us out at some point.
Yes, exactly. So first thing with any emotional response that you have to do is we have to be able to identify it. My guess is a lot of people right now are experiencing a chronic state of anxiety and they don't realize that that's what they're actually experiencing. So the first thing I want to just tell people are some of the things to be looking for as you're trying to create more awareness of what could I be feeling right now. So anxiety, very typical ways it manifests. We carry anxiety. That's part of our DNA, is we hold it. And so is your stomach hurting more than usual? Are you getting headaches? Does your back hurt? Are you feeling really tense? Those are often because you're anxious, because you're stressed out. So notice that. Are those things that you're feeling? Okay, well, because we hold anxiety like this when we're not acknowledging it and letting it out. With anxiety, there can also be the racing thoughts. Are you suddenly having a hard time sleeping? Are you really on edge? Because that's another thing. So say you're suddenly at home with your parents and you haven't been there for a long time and you notice you're snapping at every little thing. Well, one, there could be some other things going on there, but you're anxious. Like what you're experiencing right now, this new normal is overwhelming. So those are some of the things to look for when you're trying to determine, am I anxious? What am I feeling? So in a little bit, we'll get more to kind of another tool I want to give people, but on just a very practical level. So you notice, I'm anxious, I'm holding it. Deep breathing. So again, creating the awareness, I'm anxious. It's amazing how the first thing we forget to do when we're feeling overwhelmed is breathe. So the first thing I would want anyone to do, even while watching this, is just sit where you are, relax your shoulders, sit up straight, and take a really deep breath. And I think you'll be amazed at what you notice your body actually doing when you breathe. So breathe deep. Practically limit your news intake. If you're getting anxious, find 1 or 2 news sources that you find reliable, that are trustworthy, and that are not fear-mongering. And let that be your check-in. So if you're dealing with your anxiety by constant researching, scrolling, what's happening, maybe limit it to once or twice a day to those specific resources. Going on a walk. Like I said, physically, we hold our anxiety. So it's very important, especially in a season of isolation, everything's different. You got to stay healthy. That's going to be super important to managing your emotions. Go on a walk, go on a run, do your little indoor yoga videos or whatever people do with their indoor workouts. But those things are really important. That will actually help you release your anxiety. And then in turn, even that's going to help you calm. It's going to help you sleep. And then we don't have the anxiety just spinning on itself. So it's important to recognize what's happening and then to begin to take steps towards regaining some control over it. Not like, oh, we want to get rid of this. Oh, I'm going to squash it. I'm going to pretend it's not there. It's actually acknowledging it, but then putting it in its proper place of letting it motivate you when there needs to be kind of that motivation, the reality that, yeah, things are alarming right now. Fear is a normal response, but within measure. So when it's getting out of control, these are just some initial things that can be really helpful.
I remember even what you were just alluding to there at the end, and a conversation we had, it was probably last year, where you talked to me about noticing your anxiety not as a part that's all encompassing part of you, but it is just one small part of you that you almost have some dialogue with, and when you can do that, it begins to create a space where actually you can become less anxious. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Right. Yeah. So again, it's important with, as we're talking about any emotion, but specifically right now, as we're talking about anxiety, to recognize that emotions that come up and are really strong and really loud. So when anxiety is really present, it's creating physical symptoms. Think of like a little red beeping light trying to get your attention and cue you in to say, hey, there's a need here. I want you to pay attention. What we want is to be able to acknowledge this part. So, okay, so what I want and would encourage people to do when thinking about emotions, there's a necessity of differentiating. So differentiation is a big fancy word for basically separating from. So I am me. I am Jessie. God has created me. I am his. I am secure. I am who I truly am is the Holy Spirit filled version that God has made me, right? So as believers, that's our identity. That's who we are. But we've got all these parts, right? We've got all these different facets and complexities to us and emotions. I want people to think about their emotional experience, so anxiety, as a part of them. It's not who they are. This is not what defines you. This is not what gets to control you or run you, but it truly, I want people to, again, it's necessary to identify, but once you've identified and labeled, okay, anxiety, to truly picture it outside of yourself as if it's this part of you, but again, it's not all of you. So we've got this anxiety. And what I would challenge people to do is truly, I think it can be helpful for the visual to hold it, to imagine it outside of you and to be curious about it. I think a really helpful question is, how is this anxiety trying to help me? For a lot of people with different parts they have, that feels unfathomable. This part's not trying to help me. This part sucks. I hate it. So it's necessary to move into this state almost of compassion, of, because that's the thing about these different emotions and these different responses. At the core, there's always going to be a component of it's trying to help you in some way. An example could be, okay, this fear, this anxiety that I'm feeling right now, it's trying to protect me. Okay, it's trying to make sure I have enough food for my family, to make sure that we have the medicine that we need. So the initial motivation of this part, once I can stop, acknowledge it, and be curious about it, I can see it's actually trying to help me. It's not against me. What we often do with our emotions is we look at them like the enemy. And so we just try to bat it away. Get away. I don't want it. I don't want to feel it. So we ignore it. Well, what happens is it gets louder. So all emotions do this. The ones that we would maybe classify as negative, of there's a need, the red light's blinking, and we keep trying to cover it up and turn it off. Well, it's just going to blink louder and louder and louder and bigger and bigger and bigger until we actually stop, acknowledge it, turn towards it, and begin to process it. And then you almost begin to talk to it and process and bring the Lord into it, is the next step of, okay, I know anxiety, you're trying to help me. You want to keep me safe. And then you speak truth. But I am protected. I am a daughter of the King. Jesus is still on the throne. The current circumstance, the current chaos of this world, he is not surprised. So we're okay. Let's be wise. Let's do what we can. But right now we have no control. I have no control over coronavirus and what it's doing. And that's another necessary piece, is letting these parts know you're acknowledging them, you're identifying, you're processing, but then speaking the truth of, specifically with anxiety, we get anxious sometimes when we think there are things that we can control, when in reality we can't. I cannot control whether I or my family, if we get coronavirus, right? There are things I can do. It is within my control how much I leave the house, how much exposure we have. But at the end of the day, the thing that's really driving a lot of fear, or even there's sadness, which we can talk about in a minute, but even the sadness of, like, I can't see my friends. Okay, I can't do anything about that right now, right? And so it's letting go of the things we can't control, acknowledging the experience around it, but then recognizing I can't do anything with this right now. So we talk to the part, we speak truth, and then you essentially say, thank you to this part. Thank you for wanting to help me. Thank you for wanting to protect me. We got it. We're going to be okay. And then you go back to applying those, take a deep breath, and you go on a walk. So I know that was a very long-winded response, but that is what, if people could do that with their anxiety, it would be a night and day difference of what they're feeling during this season.
It's really helpful. And as you alluded to at the beginning, having everything under the umbrella of grief and the 5 stages of grief, what you just talked about was, when you're able to have conversation with it, there becomes a level of sadness. And then, might I say, the 5th and final finale stage is then a place of acceptance where you can then move forward. And these are the things that are out of my control. But first I need to grieve what's not there, or be sad about what's not there. And then acceptance helps me move forward and do the next thing. So maybe you alluded to sadness there. Maybe talk a little bit about what role sadness has in all of this.
Mm-hmm. So this is going to be a really important thing for people right now to begin to wrap their heads around, to begin to acknowledge and label, is the adrenaline's coming down. The crisis mode is sort of fading, yet again, we're still existing in a new normal. And so there is a necessary amount of sadness that's going to be natural for all of us to experience right now. So I know a lot of us, when we think of grief, we think grief equals sad. Grief is complex. And so a facet of grief is even anxiety, right? That anticipatory grief of what's going to come. Well, I can feel anxious about that, but I'm also going to be sad about that. And so sadness, it's going to be an emotion that's going to be really strong for a lot of people coming up. Because there's a loss. And so the first thing, again, with labeling it, we have to identify it. But what I want to encourage people is to have compassion for that part as well. Our tendency with sadness, probably even more than anxiety sometimes, is to just be like, I hate it. I hate that. I don't want to be sad. I want to be past it. So we try to numb. We try to just completely avoid and act like it's not there. So kind of what I did with anxiety earlier, same with sadness. There's certain kind of, again, those little alarm bells going off that can kind of cue you in. So very tangibly speaking, some of them could be, okay, am I just super lethargic? Am I experiencing excessive fatigue right now? Am I spending all of my spare time on Netflix? Has my room become a total disaster and my kitchen sink is completely full of dishes? Is there this huge lack of motivation? Am I numbing out? Am I overeating? Those are usually some good indications of numbing. And usually what's underneath numbing is a deep sadness, is deep hurt. And so then notice that, are these things that I'm doing, okay, what am I trying to run from right now is a question I'd encourage people to ask. What am I feeling that I don't want to be feeling? So again, there are things that are helpful in processing the sadness. So first we have to see it, label it, give yourself grace that like, that's a very normal emotion right now. I mean, there's so much to just grieve, even the basics of getting to go on a walk with your friend around campus. Be sad. So if there's a day that you are chilling at your parents' house right now and you just want to start crying, if you initially have that internal dialogue that's like, oh, what am I even sad about? I think we do that a lot though. I don't know why I'm sad. I don't know why I don't know. Well, there's a reason. Of course you're sad because everything has just kind of been stripped away in a sense of what normal was. So recognize you're going to be sad. And then I'd encourage people, just like we just talked about with anxiety, it's going to be a very similar process of how we talk to it.
Mm. So it's interesting you said that. I see two things that happen with sadness. One, we shame ourselves away from it. Oh, I shouldn't feel sad. It's almost in a sense that we believe it's wrong to feel sad. And the second thing I see is that we spiritualize away our sadness. We quote Romans 8:28, God's going to work all things out for the good of those he loves. We don't give ourselves the space or the freedom to be sad, almost in a way, as you're saying, to run away from the sadness. And it sounds like what you're saying is no, turn and face it and be sad and understand why you're sad and be compassionate with yourself and the part of you that it's sad, so that you can grieve and let Jesus come and heal that part of you instead of just avoid. Is that kind of accurate? Is that how you're tying then the component of God healing us in this place of sadness? Like you first have to really grieve what you've lost for Jesus to heal you in that loss.
Exactly. Yep. Perfect. There's so much hope, right, with the gospel, with the picture of Romans 8:28, with knowing that we have a Savior who not only enters into it with us, but he's felt it. And so for those who maybe the tendency is to shame themselves or to dismiss it with spiritualizing it, it's okay. Remember, Jesus was sad too. Like when I think of Lazarus, the example, I think of this constantly of, okay, Jesus lost a friend. He knew Lazarus was going to be raised. He knew that he was going to come back to life, but yet he wept, right? Like Jesus experienced and allowed himself to hold that grief, to hold that loss, even though he knew it was going to be okay. So even though, yes, we have to hold to the hope, the big picture hope that there's a day coming when everything will be restored, right? There has to be that hope that we cling to. But it's also okay to be sad in the here and now that things are not as they should be. And so even that, recognizing and holding, our world is broken, it hurts. And so we're going to feel the pain of brokenness. But as believers, as people, there's a beauty and a freedom to allow yourselves to feel that pain and to hold it, to acknowledge it. Okay, there's this part of me that's really sad. It's wanting to help me process the pain and the reality of this new normal. Okay, let's turn towards that, be kind to it, and then let Jesus enter into this with us and let him carry it. Because that's what he wants to do. He wants to enter into the pain and sadness with us. And again, just on a very practical way, if you're like, okay, yeah, but like, what do I do? What do I do with sadness? Okay, journaling. I know there are going to be people who are like, I hate journaling. Do it. Even if it's just a couple lines a day of just processing, here are the 3 emotions I felt today. This is where I am. Okay, Lord, take it. Please, I don't know what to do with this, but it's that acknowledgement piece of this is where I am. So we've got journaling. We pray. Take it to Jesus. Say, God, I have nothing. I don't know what to say, but I need you to know this is where I am and be here, right? It can be as basic as that. crying. It is important that if you have that urge to cry, if it begins to come, tears are a gift. God has designed us in a way to release those hormones, to release stress even through tears. With sadness, when we don't experience it, going back to this kind of part piece, when sadness, when that alarm bell is blinking and we ignore it, a lot of times what enters in is anxiety to squash it. So I have found that people will often, who are actually experiencing the grief process and they're in sadness, rather than processing that, they stuff it. And so then they get really anxious, because sometimes anxiety is a cue to us of, hey, pay attention, because what you're really feeling is deep sadness and we need to go there. And so I just would encourage people to try to be attuned, to pay attention to these things, but then to hold it with hope. And so even very practically, something I would encourage every person to be doing every day, but especially in this season, is start keeping a journal and a gratitude list. Gratitude is a huge antidote to despair, right? To fear, because when we can hold gratitude and begin to speak that truth over the sadness of, okay, I'm sad, things are not as they should be, there's a loss, I am grieving, sit there with it, invite Jesus in, cry your tears, pray the emotions. But then the movement is, okay, but the truth is, I know that there's hope. And I know there's still so much God is doing because he's still on the throne. And so by actually writing those things out of what God is doing, how he's showing up, he provided coffee today, I got a good night's sleep last night, there are flowers outside, whatever those things look like, to be mindful of them. And that is going to be a huge combatant against anxiety, against this deep despair, so that you're not just staying in sadness, but it's being acknowledged, being seen, and then we're moving towards something else.
It's really good. I would have 15 more questions to ask, but I think we will end on that note. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to chat with us today.
Thanks, Caleb.
Yep, I'll talk to you later.